Some episodes ask questions, some explore ideas, some try to reframe reality itself. This one doesn't really do any of that. This one is simpler, because in October of 1972, two men in Mississippi reported something that, whether you believe it or not, has never fully gone away. Not because it was spectacular, not because it was dramatic, but because it was consistent. Two shipyard workers, a quiet evening, a riverbank, and an encounter they didn't want. No book deal, no spotlight, no attempt to convince anyone. Just a story that didn't change, which, in the world of UFO stories, is already suspiciously unusual. This is known as the Pascagoula incident, and in this episode, we're going to do something a little differently. We're not going to speculate, we're not going to build a theory, we're not going to try to figure it out. We're just going to lay it out. What was reported, what was observed, and quietly, what the Law of One had to say about it. Because yes, even this is in the material. Because according to Ra, even when something like this is real, it may not actually be the point. On the evening of October 11th, 1972, two men, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, were fishing along the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. It was quiet, no crowd, no witnesses, just water, reeds, and the sound of insects. Then, according to both men, something changed. They heard a sound, a kind of buzzing or whirring, like something mechanical, but not quite familiar. And when they turned to look, they saw a craft, oval shaped, floating, emitting a bluish light. Not landing, not crashing, just there. Which is already not how most things are in Mississippi. From the craft, three entities emerged. Not human, not even close. They were described as roughly humanoid in shape, but with no visible neck. They were gray, they had wrinkled skin, and what appeared to be claw like appendages. No eyes, no clear facial features, much more exotic than most encounters of similar variety. And then, without being touched, both men said they were lifted, paralyzed, unable to move, drawn into the craft. Inside, they described a kind of examination, medical but not clinical, observational but not careful, almost as if they weren't patients but samples, which is not exactly a comforting distinction. After what felt like minutes, they were returned, back to the riverbank, back to where they had been. The craft disappeared, no explosion, no dramatic exit, it was just gone. Shaken, the two men did something unusual. They went directly to the authorities. Normally, abductees would stay quiet about something like this, but not these men. They reported the incident to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. Now, this is where the story takes a turn, because the officers didn't immediately believe them, but they also didn't dismiss them. Instead, they did something simple. They left the two men alone in a room and secretly recorded their conversation. No prompting, no questioning, just listening. And what they had captured has become one of the most discussed aspects of the case. The two men, thinking they were alone, didn't celebrate, they didn't exaggerate, didn't try to make sense of it. They were terrified, quietly, genuinely. At one point, Calvin Parker can be heard saying he might pass out. Charles Hickson tries to calm him down while admitting he's just as shaken. No performance, no audience, just two men trying to process something they clearly didn't understand, which again is not typical behavior for someone trying to start a UFO career. Over time, their story didn't change. Not in interviews, not under scrutiny, not decades later. They didn't gain much from it. In fact, for long stretches, they seemed to wish it had never happened at all. And that consistency, more than the details of the encounter itself, is what has kept the Pascagoula incident alive in both skeptical and believing communities. Because regardless of what happened, something did happen. Next, we move into what makes this case unusual in a different way. Not the sighting, not the abduction, but the fact that, according to one source, it may have been confirmed. In 1981, nearly a decade after the Pascagoula incident, a question was asked during a series of sessions known as the Law of One. The question was simple, direct. Was the landing and abduction at Pascagoula of a higher density, an Orion entity? And if so, what actually happened? Ra's response begins in session 8, question 15, and it's pretty straightforward. It was neither the Orion influence nor our people's in thought form, but rather a planetary entity of your own vibration which came through quarantine in all innocence in a random landing. No ambiguity, no symbolism, no reframing, just a statement. According to this material, the event did occur. A few questions later, the source of the entities is clarified. Ra states, these entities are of the Sirius star system, not metaphorically, not archetypally, a location, which is about as close as this material ever gets to sounding like a sci fi answer. Ra also explains the nature of the encounter. In sessions 8.16 through 8.18, the purpose is described not as hostile, but as a kind of examination. Not for harm, not for experimentation in the way we might imagine, but for what Ra describes as a form of understanding or study. And this created a strange tension, because the experience, as reported by the two men, did not feel benevolent. It felt invasive, cold, terrifying. And yet, despite confirming the event, despite identifying the origin, despite explaining the nature of the beings, Ra repeatedly downplays the importance of this kind of information. Earlier in the material, in session 6.25, when asked about UFO activity, Ra responds, we must state that this information is unimportant, and then clarifies, the law of one is what we are here to express. So you're left with something unusual. A source that says, yes, this Pascagoula event happened. Yes, these were non human entities. Yes, there is a broader context. But also, this is not what matters, which is a bit like confirming the existence of something extraordinary and then immediately shrugging it off. And that creates a kind of quiet contradiction in the center of this case, because for most people, an event like this would be everything: proof, validation, a turning point. But within this framework, it's peripheral. Because according to Ra, the real focus isn't on who is visiting or where they come from, but on what is happening here, in what they call third density, this very human experience where the central work is something much quieter: choice, polarity, how we treat one another, which is significantly less cinematic than aliens, but apparently far more important. Next, we close this out, not with a lesson, not with a conclusion, just with a simple observation about what we tend to focus on, and what, according to this material, we might be missing instead. So, what do we do with this? Two men, with no reason to lie, describe something that doesn't fit into any normal framework. Their story never changes, their fear never feels performative, and even the people who questioned them weren't sure what to make of it. Years later, a source claims the event was real, gives it context, gives it origin, and then dismisses its importance, which is not the reaction most of us would expect. Because naturally, the mind goes somewhere else. Who were they? Why here? How many times has this happened before? What else is out there? And those questions are understandable. They're interesting, they're compelling, they're cinematic. But according to this perspective, they are not at the center, because within the framework of the law of one, this moment, right here, this human experience, is what's important. What Ra calls third density is not about discovering what's out there, it's about discovering what you are, and more specifically, what you choose. Because in this density, the central axis of experience is something deceptively simple: polarity. Not good versus bad, not right versus wrong, but orientation. Do you move towards others with understanding, compassion, and openness? Or do you move towards self with control, separation, and power? It's not a single decision, it's a pattern, a direction, a slow accumulation of choices made in moments that don't seem important at all. A reaction, a thought, a judgment, a kindness withheld, a kindness offered. Because according to this material, that is the work. Not sightings, not encounters, not confirmation of life beyond Earth, but the way you respond to the life directly in front of you, which is far less dramatic. No glowing craft, no sudden revelations, no background music, just how you treat people when nothing extraordinary is happening. And even deeper than that, how you relate to yourself. Because third density is also described as a space of distortion, confusion, emotion, contradiction, where thoughts don't always align, where feelings rise before understanding, where clarity is rare. And so another part of the work is balance, not eliminating emotion, but understanding it, seeing anger without becoming it, feeling fear without being controlled by it, recognizing sadness without collapsing into it. All emotions have their antithesis, and these need to be felt simultaneously. balancing thought and feeling, accepting both, not rejecting the self, but learning it. Because in this framework, self knowledge is not optional, it's foundational. And through that process, a direction begins to form, not imposed, not assigned, chosen, again and again, in small ways, in quiet moments. So when something like Pascagoula happens, even if it's real, even if it's confirmed, even if it points to something vast and unknown, it doesn't replace the work. It doesn't accelerate it. It doesn't complete it. It sits beside it, peripheral. And maybe that's the part worth noticing. Not the craft, not the beings, not even the abduction, but the idea that something extraordinary could occur and still not be the point. Because the point, if there is one, is quieter than that. It's in the choices you make when no one is watching. It's in the way you interpret others, the way you respond to difficulty, the way you carry your own mind, and whether, over time, you move towards understanding or away from it. And maybe that's why, even when something like this is real, it can still be considered less important. Thank you for watching or listening. I wish you all love, light, peace, and joy. Take care.